We begin in Bangladesh, where tens of thousands of students and their supporters have gathered in the capital, Dhaka, to demand the resignation of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. They blame the government for a violent crackdown on dissent, which has left at least 200 people dead in recent protests against government job quotas.
Let's get more on the story from Nusrat Chowdhury, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Amherst College in Massachusetts in the United States and author of Paradoxes of the Popular, Crowd Politics in Bangladesh. Thanks for joining us on DW. So, despite the recent deadly violence, people, as we've seen, are back on the streets protesting. What is it that's making them demonstrate?
So, as you know, that the protest started to reform the quota system that the students thought was discriminatory. But given the kind of excessive force that the government has used, more than 200 people have died, which is a conservative estimate. According to a UNICEF statistic, 32 children have died. Now the demand has shifted to change in the political hierarchy of the country itself, because the students and now ordinary citizens who have expressed their solidarity with the students have actually realized that the quota system is just a kind of symptom of a larger problem in which this regime for the last 15 years has been using excessive force and has been mostly unaccountable for the violence and the repression that has affected ordinary citizens for a long time. So it's not surprising that the movement has now shifted to becoming an oppositional movement rather than one that is more focused on the quota reform itself.
All right, now, you just touched on it there. So the students have just one demand now. They previously had a list of 9. So if Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina concedes that one demand and steps down, would this be the end of the protests?
That's really hard to tell. We are actually standing on very unsteady grounds. It's a set of unfolding events. Clearly, the events of the last 15 days or so have shown us that there's a lot of grievances. There's a lot of resentment against the way in which ordinary citizens have their lives have been affected. So there should be some kind of an outlet for that kind of resentment, for those kinds of grievances, right? So it's hard to tell what would happen if the political hierarchy shifts. But the fact that a movement that had nothing to do with politics in the larger scheme of things became congealed around one political demand at the moment actually reveals that there has been a kind of long history of demands of ordinary citizens that are being unmet. And not only that whenever students or primary school teachers or environmentalists have tried to make demands, they have either been dismissed, they have been subjected to violent repression, or they have been slandered, like it has happened this time, that either they belong to the opposition party or they're the so-called collaborators who, had sided with the West Pakistanis during the War of Independence. So this is a kind of rhetoric that the students have really turned on its head and now is demanding actual political changes.
All right, we'll have to leave it there, Nusrat. Thanks for joining us on DW. Nusrat Chowdhury, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Amherst College in Massachusetts.
Tasneem Khalil is a Bangladeshi journalist living in Sweden and the editor-in-chief of Netra News. Welcome to DW. Protesters in Bangladesh are now calling for a nationwide disobedience movement where citizens are being asked to not pay their taxes, not to pay their utility bills. Do we have a sense of how widespread this could be and how effective it might be as a tactic?
Well, this is proving to be very, very successful and widespread right now. We are getting reports that people have started participating across the country. But we are also getting reports of fresh violence against the protesters, and this time by members of the government party, the ruling party, and its apparatchiks.
Yeah.
So it's, it looks successful up until now.
Tell us more about these reports of violence that you've mentioned. Where is this taking place, and what exactly are we seeing here?
We are seeing, since last night, we have been hearing that because the government, because the authorities, the police and the army, sort of failed to quell the protest, and the protesters have resumed their street agitation in massive numbers. The government decided to deploy its armed goons, ruling party goons, against the protesters from this morning. So we are getting reports from different parts in Dhaka. Munshiganj is one district where we are getting reports of protesters being violently attacked by ruling party members, activists, carrying firearms and also other kind of lethal weapons.
Now, protesters, of course, have been demanding that Sheikh Hasina resign and face trial for a police crackdown for this very kind of thing on protesters last month. How likely do you think she is to go?
Well, I have been on DW before and I said the same thing. I don't see a way out for Sheikh Hasina. I don't see a path for her to survive as the Prime Minister of Bangladesh after more than 200 people, students, have been killed by the police forces, and she has ultimate command responsibility over this. So I think for a stable Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina needs to step down. Sheikh Hasina needs to accept the latest demand by the protesters.
And what about the rest of her government? At this stage, do you see reconciliation as possible? You think she will have to go? She, of course, has been asking protesters, though, to sit down with her and talk. Is there going to be any path forward that way?
No, you cannot have a dialogue with someone who calls you for a dialogue and then unleashes the police forces against you and the army and indiscriminate shootings. So the protesters do have some logic, some rhyme and reason to whatever they're saying. They're saying that, yes, we are citizens of Bangladesh, and obviously citizens would like to have a good relationship with their government, but not with the government that indiscriminately kills students. So definitely there will be reconciliation after this crisis, but before that, the current government, I understand, needs to step down, and that's exactly what the protesters are demanding.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on DW News. That is Tasneem Khalil with that call. He's a Bangladeshi journalist living in Sweden. We very much appreciate your time, as always.